Hello, this is the continuation of my summary of Parker's short history of the Second World War, this one dealing with American and British policies towards Japan in the pre-war period. This comes from Chapter 5 of the book, The United States Enters the War, The Origins of the Japanese Attack. So, first of all, America's position regarding East Asia. For President Roosevelt, East Asia's main importance was the impact of events there on the war in Europe. Most Americans weren't much concerned about conditions in China, and those who were overwhelmingly hostile towards Japanese ambitions, but mostly for moral rather than self-interested economic reasons. In China, foreign investment was mostly from Britain and Japan, each with over 1/3, whereas American investment in China was only 6% of the total. American exports to Japan were far more than those to China, and despite the devaluation of the yen, the dollar value of American exports doubled between 1932 and 1937. American firms were actually providing some of the equipment used for aggressive Japanese expansion. Concerned Americans disapproved of Japan's violence and international lawlessness, or were sympathetic towards Chiang Kai-shek's regime as a government struggling for national independence, and perhaps even for democracy. Chiang had been very successful in winning sympathy abroad in the late 1930s, especially in the United States by the work of his wife's family, headed by the financier T.V. Soong. Thus, Roosevelt had support for a long-sustained policy of both opposition towards Japan's violent attacks on the territorial integrity of China and its attempts to limit Chinese sovereignty, and the favoring of an open-door policy towards China in which trade and investment would be open to all nations on equal terms. Anti-Japanese sentiment in the United States was reinforced by Japanese actions in 1937, which also interfered with the rights and even the safety of Americans living in China. Export embargoes to Japan began in June 1938 with a State Department request that American exporters not send equipment that could be used in bombing civilians. This was extended in December 1939 to metals needed for aircraft manufacture. In January 1940, an American commercial treaty with Japan was allowed to lapse so that legally enforceable embargoes could be ordered, so as to help Chiang Kai-shek stop the Japanese advances in China. Then in June 1940, with the British Empire now alone in resisting Hitler, Japan's advance was seen as threatening both to British interests in China as well as to Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, Borneo, and ultimately Burma and India. The Australian and New Zealand dominions, both voluntarily engaged in the fight against Hitler, were also possible victims of Japanese ambitions. Now we can turn to British policy. Theoretically, Britain had the choice to either oppose the Japanese advance or work with Japan to ensure stability in East Asia. Opposition would help Chiang Kai-shek in the first instance, but also prepare to defend Britain's economic and political stake in East Asia. In addition to British trade and investment in China itself, Malaya produced several essential raw materials, especially tin and rubber. North Borneo and Brunei produced oil. It was also axiomatic that India, Australia, and New Zealand had to be preserved from foreign encroachment. At the same time, Britain and Japan shared a common interest in an orderly China in which xenophobic nationalism might be curbed. For example, by arranging spheres of influence, with Japan having a free hand in Manchuria and then the north, and Britain in Shanghai, the Yangtze Valley, and the South. This would have been pragmatic, but it was impossible. British internationalist opinion opposed Japanese armed expansionism and collaboration with aggressors, that is, Hitler and Italy. Moreover, the German threat made it essential to get American support in the case of war, and the American administration and Congress insisted on the virtuous causes of international order and democracy. As Chiang Kai-shek also allegedly believed in these causes, the British were compelled to oppose the Japanese rather than work with them. British strategy in the Far East rested on the naval base in Singapore, completed in 1938. If the Japanese attacked, the island could hold them off, it was thought, for 3 months or so, which would give the main British fleet sufficient time to arrive and drive off the Japanese navy. But this concept was undermined in Europe. First, it was made more difficult by the building of a hostile German fleet in the 1930s, then the loss of the French fleet in 1940, and the addition of the Italian fleet to the enemy. All of these things together making it impossible. Britain's Asian empire was now only defensible with American help. British policy therefore followed a consistent and predictable pattern of opposition to Japan, hoping that American power would make it effective. After May 1940, it was no longer possible for the British to follow an independent policy in East Asia. They had to let the American government determine what would happen. Neither the American president, his advisors, nor the American public wanted war with Japan. If the US was able to stop Japanese expansion without war, this would strengthen international order, encourage Chiang Kai-shek and democracy, and facilitate British resistance to Hitler. When Japan allied with Germany and Italy in the tripartite pact in the autumn of 1940, it was obvious that Japanese leaders saw the war as an opportunity and would join it if the Americans joined the war against Germany. This was increasingly likely given the support of the British Empire, American support of the British Empire, by its provision of all aid short of war. The entry of Japanese forces into northern Indochina in the summer of 1941 was a red line for the Americans and was met with a firm reply in the form of an embargo. Neither the Americans or the Japanese wanted war, but their objectives diverged sharply. Japan wanted Chiang Kai-shek to accept Japanese imposed economic and political arrangements in China, and American acceptance of Japan's need to secure resources from China. On the other hand, the Americans insisted that the embargo would remain in place until Japan agreed to restore Chinese independence. They didn't want to give Japan a free hand, and assumed, almost until the last minute, that Japan would not risk war to get what it wanted. General Tojo, the new Prime Minister of Japan and former War Minister, put the matter clearly in a policy review demanded by the Emperor, stating that the Americans want to impose 4 principles on Japan. 1. Respect of territorial integrity and sovereignty. 2. Non-interference in internal affairs. 3. Non-discriminatory trade. 4. Disapproval of changing the status quo by force. But for Tojo, this was impossible. Japan had carried out the Manchurian and China incidents to get rid of the yoke imposed by these principles upheld by the Americans, and Japan could not withdraw its 1 million troops after having endured hardship and the loss of 100,000 dead and wounded. Without control, China would become worse, he thought, than before, and attempt to rule Manchuria, Korea, and Formosa. Japanese expansion was only possible through the stationing of troops. That's all I'm going to say for the moment. So particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement, without which these videos wouldn't be made, and thanks also to you for listening. You're very welcome to support my channel, like, comment and share on the videos, subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give Patreon and, for the moment, PayPal links below in case you want to provide practical support. Next week, we'll talk about Japan's war policy. Have a good day.